in most places, actually discharging that firearm, bullet leaves barrel, it was deadly force. Meaning, if you're going to pull the trigger, you have to have been legally allowed to kill them. We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about an interesting shooting case that occurred recently. We're going to talk about the issues that arose, things like protecting your property, what you should and should not do when you find someone trespassing, and finally, 6 words that absolutely kill your ability to argue self-defense. But before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button.
And so this case comes out, nobody died, thank God, but this is about 30 miles south of Denver. We have some teens exploring locations for a potential photo shoot. They enter onto some property. So we have gate, fence. They jump over the gate. Well, I think that absolutely makes you a trespasser at that point, entering into a location knowing entry is forbidden.
Correct. Teenagers.
All right, I'm laying out the
no,
fact.
I know. No,
this is my cold reading.
Fair enough. Go.
They attempt to locate the property owner, unsuccessful. They leave the location. They return to their vehicle, which is parked on a public roadway. Homeowner shows up, kerfuffle or something happens, and this is where it gets very, very interesting. But ultimately, the homeowner, his name is Brett Metz. He's actually a council member for the Mountain View Town Council, and they have about 500 residents in their city. He shoots through the windshield of the vehicle, strikes one of the teens in the face, very seriously injured, but thankfully not dead. Now, there's a lot of issues here. The trespass issue, potentially a self-defense against trespassers issue, and then ultimately something that Mr. Metz said here that will completely destroy his self-defense claim. So let's start first with just using force or deadly force in defense against trespassers. I think that's a good place to start.
Yes, and this is where being a teenager absolutely matters, because like, how many fences did you hop as a teenager?
It's
an ungodly.
I don't have that many fingers and toes.
I know, like me too. And so generally speaking, I do not know of any state in our great nation which allows you to shoot trespassers for merely trespassing.
That's the key word.
Merely. Because everyone who's like, so you're telling me that someone's trespassing on my property and they come up to my house with a gun and they kick my door in, I can't shoot him. Nope, not what I said. I said merely trespassing, meaning...
Yeah, when you think mere trespasser, think someone just physically present in a location where they know entry is forbidden.
Correct.
And not inside of a house, not inside of it. They haven't, no breaking, just there's a boundary.
Yes, they hopped your fence and they're doing the Macarena on your front lawn. That's it. Right, they are just trespassing. So
death penalty for the Macarena, not the trespassing.
Dun, 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 dun. So anyway, so that's it. That's all they're doing. You, generally speaking, have rights to get someone off your property. Yep. And depending on what state you're in, your mileage may vary. I can tell you here in Texas, which is fairly typical, you can use force to get them off your property. You can, physically remove someone. You can order them off your property. In fact, there are situations here in our great state in which displaying a firearm is perfectly reasonable to get trespassers off your property. However, reasonable is the key. It still puts you in the self-defense, defensive property world, which means reasonable and proportional must be your considerations. So, middle of the night, guy in a ski mask and a burglary bag and his friends trailing behind him coming up to your property, much different story in terms of pulling guns and whatnot than like the teenagers looking for their homecoming photo, right?
Yeah, and I think we talk about, what makes this person's status as a trespasser. So trespass, 2 things: entering into a location knowing that entry is forbidden, or remaining in a place after being told to depart. And I'll just say, as a practical matter, that second category, hey, get off my property, and then they refuse, that is a much better self-defense case as far as, hey, I have to claim defensive property or I have to stop the interference with the trespass. Telling the person to leave and them not departing, well, clearly they've established that they're a trespasser. But, let's say you have a formidable fence, maybe you have great signage, you can obviously establish that they're a trespasser otherwise. But that actual, I told them to leave and they didn't do it, that's clear.
That's very clear. If you're in Texas, the one Richard didn't mention. It's the weirdest factoid in the entire state of Texas.
Yeah, purple paint.
Purple paint. Purple vertical lines on your trees is good notice of trespassing.
In Texas.
It's just one of those things. It's interesting to know. So moving on, right? So you have established that they are in fact trespassers. That's great. Do not shoot trespassers. Now, this doesn't mean that this is not a fluid scenario in which a trespasser can become something more, right?
Yeah, these can be very dynamic.
Very dynamic. So I'm not saying don't be ready to shoot a trespasser. I'm saying don't just go out and do it. But if that trespasser becomes something more, all of a sudden they come at you, all of a sudden they pull a weapon, all of a sudden you can imagine a scenario in this Colorado case, they start driving their car at you to run you over, right? I mean, there are all sorts of things that can turn that trespasser into someone committing a person crime against you, in which case all normal self-defense rules apply.
Yeah. And going to the, back to Emily's proportional, well, with just a mere trespasser, again, no threat to a person, they're just physically interfering with, being physically present on the land. Force, that's the level that we're talking about. So not deadly force, think punch, grab, tackle, restrain. So that's what would generally be justified. Now, there is some folks who will say, well, a la Joe Biden, go out on your porch and fire 2 rounds off in the air. Why is that probably not a good idea?
Well, first of all, I think just you don't have to be a legal scholar to know that what goes up must come down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's often problematic. You should not shoot in the air ever. But also, in most places, actually discharging that firearm, bullet leaves barrel, it was deadly force. Meaning, if you're going to pull the trigger, you have to have been legally allowed to kill them.
Yeah.
And if they're just trespassing, are you legally allowed to just kill them?
No.
No. So if you fire warning shots in the air, you have committed a crime for which you are going to be punished.
This is where we need the mashup of Joe Biden saying, grab a shotgun, shoot on your porch, and then him introducing the Prime Minister of India the other day where he's like, who's next? Boom, boom. Don't do that. That's bad advice from the current sitting president. No, don't do that.
That would be a fun mashup.
All right, so I think trespasser status established. All right, so they leave the location before anybody makes contact with them. They're on a public roadway. Are they a trespasser at that point?
No, they are not.
So when homeowner confronts them, what would generally, and we'll talk about these facts in a little bit, but generally at that point, trespass has ceased. Would a use of force, because again, we said that a use of force may generally be used to stop a trespass or terminate the interference. At that point, what level of force would typically be justified?
0. The immediacy has passed. And if ever you need to claim self-defense, you having sought out the interaction or pursued someone, it doesn't mesh well. For example, I get lots of road rage cases in which, my client is like, I was so scared I had to show my gun or I had to shoot. Also, then I chased them down the road afterwards. And it's like, if you were so scared you had to take out your gun, don't follow them. I'm not saying the two things cannot coexist. There certainly are scenarios, but it doesn't look good.
No. I mean, that's one of the kind of elements of self-defense. Andrew Branca talks about it. We talk about it. I think we call it something different, maybe. I'd have to look at his book. It's been a while. But they want self-defenders to just be beep-bopping along, minding their own business. Threat presents itself. Yes. You're forced to defend yourself. That innocence and not seeking out the confrontation, it's a major factor in self-defense cases.
Don't track people down. Do not go confront people after the fact. It really, really undercuts your case. All
right, so there was a phrase uttered that, okay, maybe there would have been a self-defense claim by Mr. Metzier, but perhaps it wouldn't be immediately necessary anymore. Maybe he would lose on that argument. But as part of every self-defense claim, generally, what do you have to claim?
Well, you have to claim that you shot them on purpose.
Yeah.
And so it is really damning to your self-defense claim when you utter something like,
oh shit, my gun went off. That sounds like an accident.
That does sound like an accident.
That don't sound like self-defense.
No. So,
Allegedly.
Allegedly. So you get to claim one or the other. And it's interesting here because it's like they start down some defensive facts, but then once that comes out, there's no self-defense.
M. Night Shyamalan twist.
Yeah.
My gun went off.
My gun went off. It cannot be both an accident and self-defense.
Yeah. So self-defense is an intentional act. I did this because, I was protecting myself, protecting my property, protecting a loved one. It's not I shot this person on accident and it was also self-defense.
Correct. Now, that doesn't mean that things being accidents cannot negate some elements of crimes, cannot offer some other legal protection. For example, in many states, mere negligence, not a criminal act, does not rise to the level needed for the mens rea for criminality. We have something called criminal negligence for that, but just your sort of baseline negligence, nope. You get to have accidents all day long and not be charged with crimes for them. However, the differences between negligence, criminal negligence, recklessness, things that can be criminally charged, are very minute. And I'd say if the gun's in your hand and you're confronting someone and you didn't mean to pull the trigger, but you did, that looks closer to that looks closer to like recklessness, criminal negligence. That looks like something you could be charged with a crime for. So, other than negating something that's got a really like malice element to it, I don't know.
Yeah. So, you don't get to say this was an accident, also self-defense, or vice versa. This is self-defense, but if y'all don't find it was self-defense, it was an accident. So it doesn't work either direction
to argue
here.
the alternative.
And so, trespassers, this is one of those things where you want to, I will say, a good self-defense element, avoid confrontation if possible. If you can do so safely, if there's a reasonable, safe alternative to confronting the person, that's what you should do. We have seen a couple of high-profile trespassers shot, people pulling into driveways shot. We have that hunter versus landowner video. We'll link that in the description below. But you see how these situations can go awry very quickly.
Yes, very much. And you have to, you just have to keep in mind that teenagers exist and are out there because they're just, we see things like that all the time. Even my nice little neighborhood, there are, every once in a while, teenagers who run around and ding-dong ditch those doorbells at 3 in the morning. And that's a really good way to get yourself shot. But it is a good reminder for all of the gun owners out there that needs to be in your mind as well. And you need to be ready to make a snap decision about, is this an idiot or is this person a danger?
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.